This episode is brought to you by Leatherman. This is Trent Lean, an Australian hunter who's trying to work a flock of Pacific black ducks.
Let him go. Nah, flared off. Right. Oh.
It's the opening week of duck season in the state of Victoria, and there's definitely something wrong with his setup.
More birds. And I wonder why they're skirting around the bottom edge, not coming anywhere near us.
It's not a bad hide or an out-of-place decoy.
We've got the decoy spread set up so the birds work their way upwind. Straight into there, but...
It's the two protesters currently kayaking just 30 yards away from him and his buddies.
Oh, there you go. There they just flared. Good on you. Thanks, folks.
These people are anti-hunters, and they're trying to scare birds away.
You guys are familiar with hinder, aren't you? Because you are hindering a hunt paddling around in the hole there. You've already flared birds, and I've asked you to move on.
I'm executive editor Natalie Krebs. And this spring, I traveled to Australia to report on a duck season that most hunters weren't sure would happen. Recreational duck hunting was nearly banned in the state of Victoria following a recommendation from a government inquiry to end game bird hunting this past year. The practice is already banned in 3 of Australia's 6 states and severely restricted where it remains legal. I spoke to more than a dozen public land hunters, and they all had similar stories about activists interfering with their hunts.
Probably going to have to abandon the hunt, guys, because this is a waste of time with them here, so...
Hunter harassment is incredibly common in Victoria, but it's by no means the most sophisticated tactic anti-hunters are using in their crusade to shut down waterfowling. So today on the podcast, we'll examine what Australian duck hunters have to put up with and what all this means for conservation here in America.
We'd heard it had been hunting well. But yeah, unfortunately, we had some visitors that were unwanted that sort of put a bit of a kibosh on our efforts for the morning.
Trent works in demolition, but he's a board member of Field and Game Australia too. Field and Game is a hunting and conservation nonprofit that fought the duck hunting ban and who hosted me while I was working on this story. I was hunting a couple hundred yards from Trent that morning with his buddy Glenn Falla, who also works for Field and Game. We had a couple run-ins with those same protesters, but they actually spooked when I photographed them with my large camera lens. I talked to Trent about his hunt in more detail because it's a good example of all the regulations duck hunters in Victoria have to put up with.
There was two of us hunting in the boat, and that perfect would have been if they had have just come in low and split either side feet down. But at about 8:09, we had 2 activists come and paddle in on little sit-on kayaks, dressed in their fluoro gear with fluoro hats and balaclavas and whatnot, and just paddled around probably about 35 to 40 metres away from us for the next hour or so.
Yeah. So what kind of impact did that have on your hunt?
So yeah, mostly all morning, we had some birds working, but as soon as they banked around, they would just flare off. They would skirt around the outsides. I mean, you've got people paddling around with, fluoro gear on and bright red blades on their paddles. We were fortunate enough to get one mob come in on a different angle, and they didn't actually see him until they sort of turned and banked. But unfortunately, they banked in a direction where we couldn't shoot because of where they were positioned. But we did have one that actually dropped off and feet down into the decoys, and we were lucky enough to take that one, and took a bit of a retrieve to find it, but we eventually got it out of the reeds.
So, and just to be clear, you couldn't shoot most of that mob that came in because the activists, the paddlers, were in your line of fire. Is that right?
Yeah, no, 100%. Had a good shot of, they had the whole belly exposed, the whole undercarriage exposed, but because they come in quite low, it was, in a direct line of where the activists were paddling around. So, called the shot off. And even if we were to shoot one, because it was still at an elevated above their head, if the bird then did drop and we needed to do a follow-up shot, we wouldn't have been able to do it. So
yeah. Okay, so tell me about the retrieve. Like, that bird hits the water and you have a dog with you, but it seems like it's a race to get to the bird first, because the activist could theoretically, legally recover your bird before you.
They do come out onto the wetland under the premise of duck rescue. And I guess the legal definition, they can rescue a duck, any live duck. So until that duck's dead, they can actually rescue it. So legally, yes, it's technically can be a race. If they get to that duck and it's still alive before I do, they can technically still try and rescue it. So as soon as the duck was down, our black ducks are notoriously tough, and if they get into that reeds and they've still got some kick in them, they can be hard work. So it got 2 swatters on the water before it disappeared into the reeds, but it was still going, and I was just straight off after it, and it took a bit of time, but just had to trust the dog, and she eventually came out with it. So that was always a good moment.
Yeah. Tell me about ethical dispatch. Seems to be a big regulation that affects Australian hunters differently in different states. So legally, to dispatch a duck that you recover, what can and can you not do?
So effectively now, obviously, a follow-up shot is the most effective. That's what we'd always try and use. Then we've got cervical disconnection or pitting, like a finisher. So what they're trying to get away from is windmilling. So the old spinning it around on the neck. Whilst it's effective, it doesn't look very good on television. Yeah. So yeah.
Which is what the activists are doing the whole time. All this is happening, they're filming you.
Yep.
How does that for you raise the stakes or not?
Yeah, having them there adds the element that you're being recorded the whole time. That honestly doesn't actually bother me, because if you're doing the right thing, you've got nothing to be sort of afraid of. I guess where I felt the pressure was when that bird did disappear into the reeds. You just know that you've got to retrieve that. You've got to retrieve that bird, which is no different to any other time. Just the fact that this time you've got all the cameras on you, and it's just that perceived pressure that you've got on yourself. And I was over there for a long time. Like it felt like an eternity, but in reality it was nearly 5 minutes, which is a long time. And the dog kept working out of the area where the bird went in, and I called her back a couple of times and gave her another line. And she come back empty-handed, and I'm just like, I'm just going to have to trust her and let her go. And she disappeared off out of earshot through the Typha, and it was very shallow water and about 2 foot of mud. So I was really hard going, and she disappeared out of earshot, and I couldn't hear her, and I'm just there contemplating things. And then I could hear her coming back towards me. And normally when she's swimming, I can actually hear when she's got a duck in her mouth. Her breathing sort of changes a little bit, but because she was going through the mud, I couldn't be sure. And it was a very relieving moment to see her that she had the black duck in her mouth. That was a big pressure release at that time. Even though, I mean, we have to make, and as a hunter, you make every attempt you can to recover your birds. Just knowing that they were there and knowing that they wanted us not to find that bird. They didn't actually, and I don't think, because I was narrowed in on the bird, but I don't think they made any attempt to come over and try and get the bird or anything, because like I said, I was there for 5 minutes and I didn't see them. They didn't paddle over. So I think they were just waiting for me to come back without that bird, just so that they could say, oh, you didn't try or whatever. So
yeah. Okay. You were also filming them. You spoke to them. What did you say, and did they reply?
So typically they're mute. They never actually talk back to you. The only time they'll engage is if they get a rise out of people. I've had lots of discussions with them over the years, and if you talk in an educated way to them, they won't say anything, and they'll generally sometimes move on to somebody else, because they're trying to gather information to paint hunters in a bad light. I'm unfortunately fairly well known with them. And so they were definitely out to find me, because we were the furthest hunter in that wetland. And they went past you guys and to come in to find where we were. And it's about building the case. So, I let them know that we were there, so they couldn't say that they didn't know that we were there.
Hey guys, I'll say it again. Can you please move on?
Noting the time.
All right, 8:26, and they're still here. 9:02, and they're still here.
You know, let them know that if they stayed there, that they would be hindering their hunt, that they are in a flight lane, and that they would flare birds if they were to stay where they were.
Every bird that looks like it's coming over, you're scaring away.
And then was fortunate enough that the actual ducks played the game and were winging around, and were able to capture footage of them actually flaring birds. Because obviously they've got to be able to try and prove hinder. So, and it's unlike the 10-metre rule. If they come within 10 metres of us, that's a clear-cut rule. Hinder's a little bit harder. So you've sort of got to build the case and build the time. So, you know, sort of every sort of 5 or so minutes, I would just do another short video, explaining that, you know, you've just flared birds and filmed some birds flaring. You know, can you please move on, because you are, you know, continuing to flare birds. And, you know, if you don't, we're going to have to call the GMA or the police. Eventually got to the point where that it was clear that they were had hindered our hunt to the point where there was no point in us continuing to hunt, so we had to abandon our hunt. So just filmed all that part of it. So then it doesn't become your word against theirs. So yeah, just document all of that work. And then just hand that over to the police, rang 000, rang GMA, and we heard today that they've got a banning notice on them. So that was rather nice to hear.
To what degree is this prevalent throughout the whole duck season in Victoria?
Yeah, so I mean, typically there's always a lot of action for the first week, and then they go around a lot of the universities and do a lot of recruiting and stuff like that. So a lot of them drop off, but we're seeing more and more active throughout the season now. And our local wetlands, Reedy Lake, Hospital Swamps, sort of Lake Connewarre, they're there every weekend. So a lot of them will just loiter around the car parks, and they'll drive around until they find hunters. And then, you know, the ones that have got their game license, which allows them to enter the water, they'll paddle in and, you know, basically do the same thing that they did to us. And, you know, we've always been trying to educate hunters on, you know, the proper way on how to build a case and report the incidents. A lot of guys just can't be bothered. So, you know, you can understand to a certain extent, but, you know, a little bit of time does go a long way. You know, you put the time in, your hunt's already sort of been, it's been wasted in this essence that they've hindered your hunt, and you can spend an extra, you know, probably 15, 20 minutes, you know, dealing with police or GMA and, you know, potentially get a prosecution and get them off the water for all the other hunters for the rest of the season, or you can just choose to go home and, you know, complain on social media. So we're trying to educate hunters in, you know, the right way to go about it and the right way to conduct themselves. And in this instance, it looks like it actually worked. So,
and that's one thing I've been really impressed by, is how calm and collected and patient the hunters that I've seen who've encountered activists have been. Like, you guys are taking the high ground, you're being very civil, you're doing everything right. How do you maintain your composure? I mean, yeah, look, I think hunters in general, we've got everything to lose. So, I mean, they're out there, they've got nothing to lose. If we lose our cool, we can lose our license, we can lose our firearms, you know, so we've got everything to lose. So we're at a distinct disadvantage where we can't tell them what we think. So we have to remain calm and cool. And a lot of guys struggle with that. And that's why they will just move on. And that's why they get so frustrated. We've had some of our members nearly break down in meetings because, you know, they had their openings just, you know, destroyed by activists, and, you know, a calamity of errors, you know, made by people, you know, with giving misinformation and stuff like that. And, you know, they can't cope with that and they don't want to have to cope with it and they get really angry. And that's not fair, particularly on some of our elderly members. So a lot of them then don't go to those areas. Me, I guess, I don't know, through, you know, just professional life, you get to deal with different situations, and this is just a not too different situation from that. And like I said, the only time I got a little bit heated was, you know, after I did find that bird and that, you know, that pressure was sort of lifted, and, you know, I did say to him that, you know,
enough's enough. You guys have got to move on now. And, I just sort of had to pull it back a little bit after that because, you're all that cooped up tension from waiting for that retrieve. But you just, I guess the more you educate yourself with the proper process of what it takes to get a prosecution or a banning notice done, I guess it helps in educating yourself to then remain calm and know that it's, if you do this properly, you're giving the authorities all the possible information to actually put that banning notice or get a successful prosecution. So it's all sort of worth it.
Getting a banning notice on a protester is relatively rare, and it only keeps that protester off the water for the season. They can still hang out on dry land or at the boat ramps. Ultimately, most protester efforts end up pushing hunters to different spots or forcing them to pack up altogether.
7:30 after, about 40 vehicles pulled in.
This is Craig Stoddart, who was camped at Lake Waranook on opening day with a couple of buddies when a major protester camp showed up. They brought in porta potties, kayaks, and veterinary and triage tents for duck rescue. They also attracted a whole secondary parade of media, police, and game wardens throughout the day.
Yeah, we made a decision just to move over to another middle swamp. And we thought, well, we had a quick drive over there and we couldn't see any protesters or people in fluorescent colouring. And so we decided to shoot over there, which was a good decision. We had a reasonably good shoot. We all shot some ducks. Didn't have any hassles. They were on this side of the swamp down here with their whistles and flags, but all they were doing is pushing the birds back up towards us, so we did appreciate that. There were certainly here, there's probably about half a dozen in the water. And they seem to have their correct paperwork as far as the protesters are allowed to have to be in the water.
By correct paperwork, he means those protesters have gone to the effort to take their waterfowl identification tests and get game bird licenses. In Victoria, only duck hunters are allowed within 25 meters of public waters before 10 a.m. and for the 2 hours before sunset.
There's a few here. There's a tall guy. He's about 6'2". He's probably 60. Beard. The older bloke, and he's carrying a tag. And I reckon that there was definitely. Well, I had two people probably not even within 10 metres of my decoys that I set up. We didn't shoot here, but they stood right out in my decoys, like roadwork sign people, one with a big red flag. There's a bloke walking around here to have a 20-foot red flag. Yeah.
These regs are designed to reduce user conflicts and activist interference, but in practice, they end up allowing protesters to hinder hunters, and it even prevents kids from tagging along with their parents.
An older gentleman had walked into the water. He had a pole. He went up to my father-in-law and he started abusing him, calling him names, calling him a fat pig and saying that he can't shoot and he's missing.
This is Nicole Mouzakis. She was camped at Waranook with her 3 daughters, her husband, and her in-laws. They were one of the few groups who stayed put when activists set up camp, about 100 yards behind their tents.
So they were really trying to egg them on, and then they were video recording them, and they were saying that we were pointing, well, the uncles were pointing the barrels at the protesters, which they clearly weren't. Not only that, we had 2 protesters running away from the police. The police were saying stop, lack of, respect for the cops. They ran through our campsite as well, in our personal area, trying to run away from them. I had 2 ladies yell at me, and then I tried to say to them, can you please not record? I've got my children here, they're minors. And then one of them yelled out, we can't hear you over all the gun shooting. And then the other one said, well, you shouldn't have kids here. And I said, you can hear me. Can you not record? Then they started recording me. So then I just didn't bother because I don't want to add more fuel to their fire. So I walked away. I've got to take care of my kids. My kids and I went for a walk down there so we can take them to the toilet. They started following me. So it's, what else can I say?
Yeah. And so you guys, you're not going anywhere. You're staying here. And you said because you feel like they win if you leave.
Why should we leave for? This is our right to be here. This is, something that's been around for generations and generations. We've got my father-in-law that's here with his son, uncles. This is like the whole mosaic. The families are here. There's 3 different families here. So why should we have to leave for? My kids, she's just got her gun license. I'm a hunter as well. But these 2 here, the 3 of them, we want them to grow up loving the outdoors and enjoying this and appreciating what God has given us. That's why we do it.
We'll be right back.
Whether they're an adventurer, a DIYer, or a problem solver, you'll find a Leatherman for everyone on your list, no matter your budget. With over 40 years of experience and a commitment to excellence, Leatherman has a tool to meet the expected and the unexpected, and it's all backed by a 25-year warranty. Give the gift that does more. Visit Leatherman.com today.
At the end of my visit to Australia, I sat down with Glenn Falla at his home in Geelong to discuss the bigger picture of duck hunting in the country. Glenn is the hunting and conservation manager for Field and Game Australia.
So, Glenn, the potential duck hunting ban is behind you. You had a duck season in Victoria. We hunted ducks in Victoria this week, and that's excellent news. Your duck season has also changed a lot. It looks very different than it did even 15 years ago. And that includes everything from an 8 a.m. start time, which is well after sunrise, shortened seasons, changing bag limits, ducks that have been added to the list and been removed from the list that are you can hunt, now you can't. So it seems like there's a lot of uncertainty around many of the regulations from year to year with your duck season. Give me a temperature check. How are you feeling?
Well, look, I think we're all delighted after the last couple of years of such a strong battle to end game bird hunting, both in Victoria and South Australia over here in Australia. So, look, it's been a long battle, and, I wouldn't say that we've won the war, but we've won this particular battle. So, to say that we're pleased that there is a duck season going ahead would be an understatement. We've still got a lot of work to do. You're right. The way that those seasons have looked in recent years has altered quite a bit. And it's altered due to political pressure and people that were in power in recent years, the political influence of the Animal Justice Party and other people that work against us continually. There are a number of groups here in Victoria that are adamant that, it's an archaic practice and that it needs to stop. They won't give up. They're devastated at the moment. We're quite pleased they're devastated, absolutely devastated. There was 9 recommendations given after a 12-month inquiry. The first of those 9 recommendations was to cease game bird hunting forever in Victoria. And that was the one recommendation that they moved away from. And they said, no, it is ethical, it is sustainable, we can move forward. Now we need to reshape it. So not only this process, but there's a number of other processes off to the side. So the Prevention of Cruelty to Animal Act, for instance, is being rewritten as we speak. The wildlife regulations are due to be rewritten this year before September. So there's a heap of work to do, and certainly it'll look different again next year, but we're quite upbeat about how that might look at the end of the year.
Yeah, and tell me a little bit, I've seen them this week, but for people who are listening, who I might refer to them as anti-hunters throughout this podcast. You guys call them activists. Who are these people? Who's your average person on the ground?
Well, I guess first of all, they see themselves as duck rescuers. That's just a load of cobswallet. To be quite frank, during the inquiry, they openly admitted that they've never resussed a bird in all the years that they've been out there. So, Natalie, you've seen this week Wildlife Victoria out there with their triage tent and all of their gear, with the people bringing in birds that they've been able to race to and beat a hunter or a duck dog to. Have they saved a bird this week? They're claiming in the media that they've saved 2. Well, if they saved 2 on the opening 5 days of the Victorian season, they haven't had a very high success rate. And to be honest, if they saved 2, I'd be surprised, because last season they didn't save 1, and they admitted that during the inquiry. So they're not duck rescuers. They're there for one reason. They're there to try and hinder and harass us, intimidate us, and push people out of the lifestyle that we enjoy so much.
One thing that you've mentioned this year is that they're getting desperate for any sort of opportunity to make hunters look irresponsible or get them in trouble. And so that has included everything from filming at the boat ramp. We were filmed the entire time when we came back on Friday.
Yeah.
People filming us, and making sure we had our seatbelts on to back up to the boat ramp. There was an example where protesters got out the tape measures and were measuring how far away people were camped from the water during the duck opener. So can you talk a little bit about that? and how useful or not it is. To me, it strikes me as a colossal waste of everybody's time.
Yeah, and you're right. They're getting desperate. So, let's talk about measurement for a moment. I talked about the safety of ourselves and the activists that are out there in the water. So Field and Game Australia, for instance, would recommend that hunters set up 100 metres from the next hunter just for their own safety. So here we are with this ridiculous law that, the activists that are out there supposedly saving ducks, rescuing ducks, are allowed to stand within 10 metres of us. Well, anybody that knows the ballistics of a shotgun, that's just absolutely deadly and an unsafe situation. So we'd like to get away from that for a start. But, you say that they've been using tape measures to measure from the edge of the water to camps and from the edge of the water to where young children in camps might be allowed access during the early and late hours of the day. They're the sorts of things that they're doing. They're getting very desperate because they know that hunters have well and truly woken up to the fact that they cannot do one single thing that even looks like crossing the line. Everything that we're doing is being filmed. You can always expect that you're being filmed. You can't even take a leak off the front of the boat out there without expecting you're going to be on film. So, hunters are being that well-behaved and that careful and that cautious that they're now turning to things that are minor.
Yeah, there's a lot of petty stuff that's happening like that, just like little details trying to get hunters in trouble. But there's also a whole much more sophisticated level of anti-hunters working against hunters. So, for example, when I landed in Melbourne a few days before the opener, you told me you had just been updated that I believe it was 32 wetlands had been closed to duck hunting ahead of the season. So talk to me a little bit about that, bird counts, like what shutting down access seems to be a big way to concentrate hunters in an area. So explain some of that and if that's kind of a new tactic or if that's always been happening, or if it's a legitimate way to make sure that birds are getting refuge.
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are a couple of big organisations here in Australia, the RSPCA and BirdLife Australia, that are considered by the government agencies to be genuine stakeholders in this process or in this activity. And certainly we respect BirdLife Australia for the work that they do as birdos with all their counting and keeping control of populations of migratory birds and every other thing. And they're quite skilled at what they do. Where we start to lose the respect is when that's being misused to inhibit what we're doing, because they've come out clearly during the inquiry process and said that their view is that duck hunting needs to stop and that all game birds in Australia are on a 30-year decline and they're all going to disappear off the face of the earth in coming years. And we don't agree with that. They don't have the science to back that up. We agree that there has been declines in certain species and there's ebbs and flows or highs and lows in the population. We understand that, we respect that, and nobody cares more about that than hunters, to be honest, because at the end of the day, it's our sustainable population to hunt in the future. None of us want to hunt them to extinction. We're more than happy to work with those types of people to put in place appropriate measures. But when it's being used against us to shut us down, that's where we draw the line. And that's exactly what's happening. Those organisations are working very hard. They're big organisations with lots of funding, and particularly the RSPCA, they've been tapped into line in the past and told that they needed to move back into their lane and move out of the activism lane and back into what they're supposed to do best, which is, rescue animals that are being mistreated or been dumped, puppies and cats and things that have been dumped on the street or dumped out in the bush, animals that are being kept by people and not being looked after for whatever reasons. That's their job, and they do a great job of that, and we respect that. But when they move into looking after other people's interests in having us shut down, that's where we draw the line. And certainly that is the new MO. Things have changed in recent years. They've worked out that they can't shut us down the traditional way, even after an inquiry in 2 states, I might add, not just in Victoria, but in South Australia as well. And both inquiries ran for a very long time with a number of members of Parliament from all aspects of politics here in Australia. The one in Victoria was completely biased and loaded to have us shut down, and surprise, surprise, that was the number one recommendation. Of course, people saw through that, and thankfully the ministers that were responsible took the option of ignoring that number one recommendation and then took on the other 8 recommendations and are working with hunters and hunter organisations to work through that and put things in place. So from our perspective, the sustainable argument is behind us. We've proven that with the science and the data that we can continue to hunt the way that we have in the past with an adaptive harvest model regulating the bag limit and to a lesser degree the length of the season. We're hoping that at this point in time the adaptive harvest looks like no change to season length, just a change to the bag limit depending on the numbers that are around and the conditions for breeding. And of course we support that because that supports our future. So we're right at the moment in the middle of moving from what we've had as an interim harvest model for around 4 years now into a more substantial adaptive harvest model next year, and we're very hopeful that that'll give us a positive result. And, that means if we have 3 or 4 years of drought in a row here, because, Australia's just described as the country of droughts and flooding rains, we know that we go through dry periods, and when that happens, of course, we're reasonable about that. In those situations, of course, we're going to accept very low bag limits, and then when we have the good years, we expect to have good bag limits. And what this adaptive harvest model should deliver, we say should because until it's in print and the print's dry, the devil's always in the detail, that what it should deliver is some assurance, not only for the hunter, but also for the industry. You've seen, Natalie, this week, lots of people concerned that they can't get hold of the regular steel shells that they would use. There's a shortage of ammunition here in Australia because for the last 3 or 4 years there was an uncertainty whether it would go ahead. There's a shortage of equipment. You can barely buy waders here in Australia at the moment. There's very few decoys left on the shelves. Nobody in industry has invested in equipment in recent years because they didn't know the future of duck hunting particularly and game bird hunting in general, so even quail. But that's caused us some issues in recent years. Hopefully we can now move forward. We know that duck hunting is here and it's here to stay for the short term. We don't expect to be even discussing the future of duck hunting for the next 5 years unless there's something horrible goes wrong. You can never have guarantees in politics, but we're certainly feeling more confident than we have in the past. And hopefully that the industry will then invest because, just to have ammunition here for the 2025 season, the big companies like Winchester Australia and what have you need to have those orders in place now to have that product on the shelf next year for what should be a regular start in March, 3rd Saturday in March next year.
That's all good. I'm glad to hear. I'm glad to hear that optimism and forward looking. I'm going to go a little bit back and then we'll hop ahead to where we go from there. The last thing I want to ask about on the wetland closures, can you give an example of how that regulation is potentially being used against hunters?
So it's pretty difficult to explain the closures process in a few minutes, but you and I have discussed this during the week. Natalie, we've done a few kilometres in the car and had lots of conversations. So it's a complex situation to close a wetland. There's a lot of things that come into consideration. And a lot of the reasons that wetlands have been closed this year has been migratory birds or colonial nesting of birds. So to give you an example, brolgas, and we all love seeing brolgas. They're a beautiful bird. And naturally they do use a wetland as their natural habitat to breed and pair off and what have you. So here in Australia, if you've got more than 15 brolgas in one group, it's considered a flocking event. It means that they're courting and they're getting ready to breed. And so they gather near the wetlands. Of course, when the hunters go in, they fly off and sit up on the hill 100 metres, 200 metres away. Sometimes they don't even fly off. I have supplied video and photographic evidence to the GMA and other people in recent years of brolgas actually in our decoys while we've been hunting. And you've certainly seen other migratory birds this week still feeding right around us while we've been sitting in the hide. So Disturbance is the reason that they're using to shut a lot of these wetlands down. You know, us being there is going to disturb them, push them off. They're going to starve because they can't use those feeding grounds, or they're not going to breed because we've pushed them away from the wetland. And, you know, we have a hard time swallowing that with what we witness. Yeah, they're disturbed. We absolutely cannot deny that they're disturbed. They move out of the spot they were standing in. It's just like if I pushed you out of the way to get to the bar. All we're doing is pushing them to the side for 5 minutes, you know. They soon find somewhere else to feed very nearby, or sometimes they return right back to where your footstep was. So then we start getting into an argument about whether we've disturbed what they were feeding on, or, you know, the soil that they were feeding in, those sorts of things. It's out of control, to be honest. The only activity that's being shut down from these wetlands is hunting. So, you know, I can't go in there for a couple of hours in the morning and hunt birds because I'm going to disturb them, but it's okay for a fisherman to come along and fish for 6 hours. It's okay for my neighbour to go and walk their dog down there. It's okay for the bird watchers to be down there every day at daylight trying to photograph some rare bird. It's okay for an aeroplane to fly over the top because there's an airfield nearby. It's okay for the cow to come down and have a drink and do a big turd on the side of the wetland. You know, it's fanciful. The only people that are being forced out are hunters, and it's a targeted impact on hunters. They're just trying to shut us down any way they can.
So what is this, the wetlands closures on it's public lands that are getting closed down. Activists are protesting on public lands. So what is this doing to hunters? Is this driving hunters to private lands, or in some cases to other states to hunt where they're not going to be bothered? How is it changing hunter behavior?
All of the above is true. And it's not a good thing, in our opinion. You're forcing hunters to hunt on less wetlands, and, you know, people can say, oh, well, it's been a good wet year, there's lots of wetlands around to choose from. That's true, and I certainly understand the concept of refuge. The birds have got to have somewhere where they can go and rest. I get that. If there was a small number of wetlands that were selected as refuge, and that was the argument, is we're leaving this one as refuge in this region, you've got 15 that you can hunt and 2 that are closed, and that's their refuge, we'd probably accept that argument. But that's not the approach. It's, you know, shut everything down that you possibly can. There's a new reporting system that's been put in place this year. And, you know, in fairness, it's for illegal hunter behaviour, and it's for illegal activist behaviour as well. And they've made it easier also to put in reports that there are protected species on wetlands, and if there's a reason to have it closed down, it's a very good way for the government agencies to triage, if you like, or prioritise what they need to go and count and verify and have closed down. But it's a system that's been put in place for all the right reasons, and we would support it if it was being used responsibly. It's not. It's being used by every man and sundry that wants us closed down, and they're trying to use it against us. And, you know, it's a heavy burden on the departments that then need to go and count these wetlands. You witnessed an activity last week when you were sitting your wit where people needed to rush off and count things in a hurry because things had been reported at the 11th hour. And sad to say, one of those wetlands that was closed down at the drop of a hat at the beginning of the season, you and I visited the other morning, and surprise, surprise, we turned up and I said to you, you know, if it's shut down, there'll be signage up and everything will be okay. Well, we pulled in, there was no signs, so we assume it's not closed. We weren't intending to hunt there, so I didn't bother checking any apps or anything like that. But we get out there and there's one sole hunter on that wetland, and he's happily going out in his canoe to hunt, and indeed he did. I didn't stop him because I wasn't aware that it was closed. There was no signs. It wasn't until we were driving somewhere else a few hours later that we noticed. I did eventually find the time to check the app, and, yeah, surprise, surprise, that wetland was closed. So, you know, I feel for that hunter that was out there actually hunting illegally but didn't know it. But what would you expect when there's no signs up?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the, you know, to your point earlier about disturbance, the idea that you're disturbing birds. You know, many of the regulations are not working. They're kind of working against hunters, right? Like, you can't get in there early, slip out. In Victoria, the regulation you mentioned, where if a pair of birds come in legally, you're hunting by yourself. Legally, you can only shoot that bird, and you must recover that bird before you can shoot another bird. So what you've done is you're sitting there and you could keep having pairs coming in, and instead of shooting 2 birds, shooting the next 2 birds and shooting the next 2 birds and getting the hell out of there, you're sitting there waiting for more and more birds to come in, and you're there longer, you're educating birds, you're disturbing those birds. And so it almost feels like you guys are getting regulated to death in a way that is not conducive to the mission that seems to be the message that's getting out there about why those regulations exist for duck hunters.
Yeah, you've articulated that perfectly. I could take you along to our next meeting and you'd be repeating what I repeat every time that I'm in the room. To be honest, you're echoing our thoughts. It's not working for the birds. It's not working for the species. It's not working for the other members of the community that want to share those wetlands. But even that's a little bit fanciful, Natalie, as time goes on. It's starting to get cool in the mornings here. We're in autumn. We're heading towards winter. We find by the end of the season, we don't see anybody out there. Even the activists back off a little bit.
This is one thing, you've got protesters working against duck hunters, but on the other side, this goes back a little bit to the ban, but can you give me an example of how hunters are working together and pushing back? And I'm thinking specifically about all outdoor recreation groups kind of working together to put up a united front.
Yeah, I'm glad you've raised that question, and I'm sure it's not a loaded question, but you're aware of the great work that's been done by various trade unions here in Victoria that have assisted us, because they've got hundreds of thousands of members that have got lots of disposable cash. They're young, haven't yet gotten into the family way. They're earning good money. They work bloody hard for their money. They get a rostered day every month, and they've got all the toys, so they want to get out there and enjoy the outdoors just like we do. Look, it's anything from rock climbing and gold detecting to fishing, hunting, and all those other activities. They've all got boats and jet skis and four-wheel drives, motorbikes, all those activities that happen outdoors. We work hard, we play hard here in Australia. They've gotten right behind the cause. They're dedicated to the cause, and they're not going away anytime soon. They've been a great assistance, and as I said, the reason for that is that they're standing for their members. They're advocating for their members to be able to do what we've done forever. We're not harming anyone or anything. It's sustainable, it's ethical, it's legal. Why should people have the right to shut it down just because they don't like it? And at the end of the day, I don't want to paint everyone with the same brush or put everybody in the same bucket, but a lot of the people that are working against us, nearly all of them, don't agree with consuming meat. They don't agree with intensive farming. They want to shut it all down. And here in Victoria, people have finally recognised or realised that if duck hunting was to go, fishing would be next. And rock climbing's under pressure and gold detecting's under pressure. The licences and all of the restrictions and regulations that people need to go through to do anything in the bush these days other than pay a fee to walk on a boardwalk that's been put in place by a government authority, and the money that you pay goes towards building the next one. The approach is either pay to use the bush or lock it up and leave it and not let people in the bush. And it's just outrageous, because we all know there's a connection for our community in the outdoors. It's good for our health. It's good for our well-being. It's good for our mindset. There's no better way to let the woes of the working week or your family worries dwindle away than to get out there in the outdoors, whether you're doing any of those activities that we've just listed,
If duck hunting, recreational duck hunting, were to end in Victoria, the ban had been issued, it seems like Victoria would go the way of New South Wales, which is the state that contains Sydney, and where duck hunting was shut down a few decades ago, where you can still kill waterfowl with very few regulations. So can you explain a little bit about that and the idea that duck hunting, if it were banned, ducks would still be killed in Victoria because of depredation issues?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I don't want to put a dampener on the New South Wales situation. They're doing a great job of managing the population of ducks in New South Wales, and of course they've got intensive rice farming in New South Wales, which does make a difference. But you're right, they're hunted under mitigation, and of course it's one word, Natalie, recreation. We call our season a recreational duck hunting season. I think that needs to be changed personally. We'd like to see it changed to consumptive harvest. But at the end of the day, the people that are working against us want recreational game bird hunting in all states and territories shut down. In New South Wales, what they did when they stopped recreational game hunting back 20 years ago, the only thing they've succeeded in changing over there is that quail can't be hunted. And they're there in their thousands and breeding, and guess what? Surprisingly, they've got wings and they've got feet. They walk and they fly and they come down to Victoria and other states, South Australia, Tasmania for that matter, where they can be hunted. So, all they're doing is leaving some refuge in a state that's breeding lots and lots of birds, and we're getting great quail hunting. Thank you very much. But when it comes to duck, you can hunt ducks in New South Wales on a mitigation program. If you know a few different landholders, you can probably hunt for 10 months of the year. There are not bag limits, but there are quotas that are set per farm, per region, but they're quite liberal, and they're liberal for a reason. They need to be to protect the crops. So at the end of the day, if you know the system and you can work the system, you're not cheating, you're not doing anything illegal, you're working within the system. But you could go and shoot 200 ducks a day, and you might do that for a week and move to another farm. And people do. They go up there and shoot 150, 200 birds in a night. No requirement to consume the birds. So they're left there to lay using lead shot, not non-toxic like we are in Victoria, and you get to do it for 10 months of the year. So, if people think that by ceasing recreational hunting in any state is going to save birds, they're in fairyland. At the end of the day, these birds, they're not – it's a fine line for an organisation like ours to walk between mitigation and reference to pest or recreational and a native game bird that we value. And, we do value that bird. But if they were successful in finishing recreational hunting, they would become pest species controlled under an authority to control wildlife here in Victoria. They already exist. There are already thousands of ducks a year that are hunted on authority to control wildlife. Why? Because these people that don't like to eat meat, surprisingly enough, like to eat vegetables, and to grow vegetables successfully, you've got to keep the bloody ducks off, just like all the other animals that are killed, snails and bugs. And unfortunately, when they poison those damn things, they kill everything that's in the paddock. It doesn't matter whether it's a ladybug or a grasshopper or a rabbit. Everything gets poisoned in order to put salad on the table. So, if you think by eating salad and not meat, you're going to save every animal in Australia, you need to go and educate yourself a little bit.
I'm curious, after all of this that you've been through, all the stuff you've seen, all the tactics you've seen anti-hunters try, what lessons can we Americans learn so that we do not end up in the same situation, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? We're already seeing a lot of insidious attempts, and outright attempts to by anti-hunters to do things like ban mountain lion hunting in Colorado or prevent a black bear season from happening in New Jersey. But we're also seeing, the composition of our Fish and Wildlife Commissions change with mandates to have non-consumptive users, such as birders or whoever, on the table making decisions about state game agencies and our regulations that have traditionally honored the North American model of wildlife conservation. So we're already seeing some of that stuff happening in the U.S., but we are not seeing nearly the pressure that you guys are. So with all that, what should we be aware of? What should we not discount? And what do we need to be doing to prevent this?
So I guess let's start with, where we're at after such a battle here in Victoria and South Australia and, to some extent other states and territories as well. You can call it resilience. I'll call it stubbornness. We're just not going to give up the fight. We'll fight to the death. It's as simple as that. It is so important to us. Those of us that are engaged it's our lifestyle. We're not going to let it go. We're not giving up anytime soon. So as far as what you guys could learn from us, there's a lot of good things that have come out of this inquiry. I think those that work against us thought, this inquiry is going to expose all the bad things about hunters and they're all going to crawl back under their rock and disappear and they're never going to go out and hunt again. Well, guess what? You gave us a beautiful open platform to discuss absolutely everything and defend with facts, data and science, everything. And surprise, surprise, we came out the other end and it was sustainable and ethical. We just needed to do a little bit of work on changing, the aesthetics of it and continuing to reduce wounding, which is what any hunter wants to do anyway. So we've come out the other side of it more enthused than ever, more confident than ever. But one of the things that's also happened is our relationships with various organisations from around the world and specifically from America. We have had a great interest from all of the organisations over there. They are taking notice of what's happening over here. They've been happy to reach out and help. There's a connection that's been made there. And at the end of the day, we all need to have each other's back. Not just you looking after us, not just Americans looking after Australians, the other way around as well. We're all being attacked in a similar manner for similar reasons. And we know that those who work against us are certainly global. It's not a little group down here in Geelong. They're Geelong Duck Rescue. They're nothing. It's the big organisations. It's the not-for-profit organisations like the BirdLife, the RSPCA and other groups that are funded. Money comes from overseas and lots of it. They've got support from overseas. We've seen our Animal Justice Party member of parliament over in America recently trying to have a kangaroo leather band for different products and what have you, and they've been successful in some of that stuff. You probably would have to laugh at that given what you've seen on the road this week and how many of them are dead on the side of the road and how many are out in the paddocks, how many near misses we had on the road even. Many a time one of us has looked up and said, did you see that one? And that was like 2 metres from the car, and it's like they would have us slow down to 60 kilometres an hour everywhere that we went on country roads so that we don't ever hit one. It's unfeasible. The country couldn't operate that way. So, the support from various people around the world has been fantastic. It's going to continue to grow. We've got good working relationships now. We need to be supporting you guys with the things that are being thrown at you. People around the world need to take note as to exactly what's happened in Australia in the last 18 months or so in 2 states. Look at the process, expect that similar things are going to happen. If they are ever successful in banning recreational game bird hunting in Australia in any state, it will snowball from there. There's absolutely no doubt in our minds, and I don't think there's too much doubt in the minds of those who are working with us from around the world either. So absolutely people need to open their eyes. They need to understand that you could be next. You need to be vigilant, and probably one of the best things that hunters can do is make sure that they are part of one or more hunting organisations that are out there advocating for you. It's all too easy to sit back and just say, I haven't got the money to be a member. I'll spend all my money on hunting equipment. At the end of the day, you can have the best equipment in the cupboard. It's no bloody good to you if the government has, outlawed you using it. So don't sit and whinge on social media. Get in there and get something done. Get your hands dirty. You'll find that you'll end up with a whole lot of friendships, a whole lot of new places to hunt, a whole lot more smiles on your face, and at the end of the day, you're protecting what we all love.
More ducks coming around, and it just banked off. Thanks, guys. Thanks for that. Doing a really good job of hinder. Would have been a great morning if they weren't here. Yeah. Plenty of birds about, but can you blame them not wanting to come in here? Go all the trouble of building a beautiful hide, camouflage ourselves, and you have fluoro muppets paddling around your decoys.
This episode of the Outdoor Life podcast was reported, edited, and produced by me, executive editor Natalie Krebs. It was mixed and mastered by Mike Pedersen of 85 Audio. You can read my full story at outdoorlife.com/Australia. Music in this episode was by Pierre Locatelli via APM Music.